Tonight, we've got a calming collection of Halloween bedtime stories to help kids sleep. Let's get cozy and drift off together. Before we do, could you please tap subscribe? By doing this small thing, you'll let YouTube know you love what we do. Let's get ourselves cozy, snuggle down, and I'll begin. The Halloween Fashion Show by Luke Prendergast. Deep in the heart of a faraway forest stood a cozy wooden cabin. Inside the cabin lived a family of koalas. Coco lived there with his parents and his grandparents and his little sister, Kira the panda. If you stepped out of the cozy cabin, currently decked out for Halloween, and walked down the path, past the piles of pumpkins and under the decorations that had been strewn between the treetops, you'd find an old beech tree growing. And this wasn't just any old beech tree. It was, in fact, an extremely special beech tree because it functioned as the forest notice board. When there was something all of the citizens of Sleepy Forest needed to be made aware of, a note or a sign was stuck on the trunk of the old beech tree, or hung off one of its branches, so that people walking by through the middle of the forest could read about any news or events that had taken place. And one evening, a new sign appeared on the beech tree. This is what it said. "Attention, all spooky foresters and sleepy little ghosts. It's that special time of year again, Halloween. And this year, Halloween is going to be even more special. You are all invited to participate in the Sleepy Forest Halloween costume competition. Open up your fancy dress boxes, get out your sewing kits, unleash your imaginations. Do you think you can be the coolest, sassiest, best-dressed creature in all of the forest? Let's wait and see. Happy Halloween, your Spooky Forest Social Secretary, Camo the Chameleon." As soon as Coco and Kira read the note, they headed straight for the grotto where their friend Camo lived with his family to ask him all about it. They found him sitting on the rock that stood outside the grotto, surrounded by jack-o'-lanterns, eyes closed, listening to the rustles of the dry leaves floating across the ground. "Hi, Coco. Hi, Kira," Camo said, opening one eye and spotting them. "I suppose you've come here because you've just seen my sign?" "That's right," said Coco. "It was quite a surprise. We had no idea you were planning on throwing a Halloween costume party. You never mentioned anything at school this week." "Well, Coco," Camo said, "that's because up until yesterday, I didn't have any idea about it either. It just came to me last night. You see, I was busy thinking about Halloween, and it occurred to me, who always has the best costume at Halloween?" Well, that was an easy answer. "You do, Camo," Coco and Kira said simultaneously. Of all of the residents of Sleepy Forest, Camo was by far the greatest at anything theatrical. He had starred in plays, he organised the annual Carnival of Colour, and just a few months ago, he had worked hard with the old butterfly, Madame Flutterdust, to put on a big musical show, and then the pop star Swifty herself had turned up. And yes, every year he had the best Halloween costume too. "Well, guys," Camo continued, "between you and me, I was getting pretty bored of having the best costume year in, year out. I mean, where's the fun in that for me? There's no challenge. There's no sense of competition. There's nothing to make me work extra hard to pull something extraordinary out of the bag. I needed some inspiration. I needed to add some fuel to the Technicolor fire that is my dressing-up box. And I thought to myself, well, what could be better at stimulating some competition than, you guessed it, a competition? And so I thought I would set up the very first ever Sleepy Forest Halloween costume competition. Coco and Kira both looked at him delighted. It was just classic Camo to dream up something as brilliant as a costume competition because he was bored of always being the best. But it's not just about that, Camo told them. I also thought it would be a fun thing for all of Sleepy Forest to get involved in. Oh, yes, Camo, Kira said. It's perfect. What a great way to bring everyone together on Halloween, Coco agreed. Great, said Camo, beaming at them. So, are you two going to take part? You bet, said Coco. Nothing could stop me. Me too. And what's more, Kira said, I'm not just going to take part. I'm going to win. And so it was that the spirit of competition spread itself around Sleepy Forest just as Halloween was approaching. While pumpkins were carved and put outside houses, and paper chains of ghosts appeared slung between the treetops, everyone who'd signed up for the Halloween costume competition got down to the business of making their costumes. The forest took on a hushed, focused kind of feel. Coco and Kira were in their room, surrounded by cuts of fabric, safety scissors, pieces of black felt, sequins, and even long pieces of bright pink fluffy pipe cleaner. They each had an idea for what they were going to dress up as for the competition, but neither of them wanted to reveal it to the other. They wanted to keep it as a surprise. And so, when they needed help from each other, like for holding a piece of fabric while the other one cut it into shape, or when Kira had to measure Coco for what looked suspiciously like it was going to be a cape, they had to be very careful not to give away any crucial, telltale information. When Coco saw Kira curling the pink pipe cleaner round and round into a spiral, he almost guessed what she was going as. The thought popped into his head, but then, just as quickly as it had arrived, it disappeared again. Thoughts were tricksy like that. And all the while the folks of Sleepy Forest were busy making their costumes, Camo was equally busy preparing the stage for the competition. He'd envisaged the event as a fashion show, but spooky. But he, too, wanted to keep everything a secret. So around the forest clearing where the competition would take place, he'd hung long purple sheets off the trees, and only those handful of forest creatures who were helping him with preparations were allowed to come through. This was set to be the greatest, most extravagant Halloween that Sleepy Forest had ever seen. And at last the 31st of October arrived. The day went as every other day always did. The Sleepy Foresters heading out to work or to school, handing in their homework or serving customers, or fixing a hole in the roof. But come the evening time, they all went home, donned their costumes, and arrived at the forest clearing, where the long purple drapes had finally been taken down. And what a sight they had to behold. Down the middle of the clearing, a long, rickety wooden catwalk had been set up, with neon lights down the edges and many spotlights shining down from the trees. Glowing pumpkins with toothy grins lined the edge of the catwalk, and at the back, a huge wooden scoreboard had been erected, with the names of the contestants. It had been designed by Buck the Beaver, Sleepy Forest's resident woodworking expert, and he was already waiting with wooden number cards, ready to place them on the scoreboard for everyone to see. And by the side of the stage, a large pyramid of some unknown thing was hidden beneath a long black cloth. People took their seats, chattering in merry anticipation with each other, until a drum roll sounded over the speakers, and onto the stage stepped Camo himself. His chameleon skin had turned its most flamboyant array of rainbow colours, yellow and pink and red and green, and in his hand he held a golden black sparkly microphone covered in sticky spider's web decorations. Into the microphone he gave a little cough, and once silence had settled over the waiting crowd, he gave them a big grin and said, "I'm most gruesomely glad to announce that Sleepy Forest's, or rather I should say Spooky Forest's, first ever Halloween costume competition has officially begun." There were great cheers around the audience. "This," Camo went on, "is going to be a fashion show like you've never seen before. I'm hoping tonight to see costumes so brilliant that you'd never have imagined them in your spookiest and most fantastical dreams. Tonight, I will be one of the fashion show judges, but I can't do that alone. So, please put your hands together for two of my cousins, Mo and Leon, who are visiting Sleepy Forest just to lend a helping hand." Camo threw his arm open wide towards a judge's table that stood by the side, where two fresh-faced and sharp-eyed chameleons, one orange and one green, smiled and waved at the clapping crowd. "But," Camo continued, "in order to judge this competition, we need even more help. That's right. Tonight, we need you. We won't only be judging the contestants through our own experience and knowledge of fashion, our own instinctive opinions. We will also be judging them and allocating scores based on audience reaction. And so, if you really love one of the competitors, make sure we can hear your love." And as though to show Camo just how enthusiastic they could be, the audience broke into a spontaneous round of cheers and applause. "Yup, that's right," Camo said, nodding and twirling the microphone. "That's just it. Now, before we get started, I'm sure there's one more thing you're all desperate to know, and that is, if there's a competition, and all competitions have a winner, then—" Camo stepped towards the pyramid structure with the black cloth draped over it. "What's the prize? Well, let's see." And with one graceful swish of his wrist, Camo swept the black cloth away to reveal a tottering tower of golden, perfectly baked pumpkin pies. "Here," Camo said, "and with many thanks to our very own Betty the Badger, who spent the last few days baking all of these absolutely delicious-looking pies. A year-long supply of pumpkin pies. That's the prize that's up for grabs tonight, ladies and gentlemen. And if I may say so myself, those pies look so mouth-watering that I'm beginning to regret not taking part myself. But now, without further ado, let the Halloween costume competition begin. Camo scurried across the stage and took his seat between his two cousins. All of the lights in the forest dimmed. Even the purple lights along the edge of the catwalk switched off, so that the only illumination came from the quietly crackling pumpkins, who let out a golden glow and sent long shadows of jagged-toothed grins across the floor. The drum roll started. Music played. The contest had begun. From backstage, Kira watched as the first contestant stepped onto the stage. A giraffe who had dressed up as a ghost, with a long white sheet over its head that fell in floating folds around his legs, and two dark and spooky eye sockets. The giraffe, who seemed a little nervous, tottered up the first half of the catwalk, but then he got the hang of it and continued on his way in a mixture of a model's strut and a ghost's weightless drift. The audience clapped and cheered. Kira herself was feeling a little nervous, truth be told. There was a large audience, and Camo had really pulled together a professional-looking catwalk. She'd said she really wanted to win the competition, and of course she still did. But looking around at all the other contestants, she didn't feel quite so confident. And she didn't mind so much if she lost out to one of them. There were so many brilliant costumes. A cow dressed up as a milkman, hilarious. A swan who looked like she was erupting out of an open banana skin. A dog dressed up as Bluey. Wait! Kira reached out and grabbed Coco's arm. "Hey, Coco," she said. "Is that—" But she didn't get a chance to finish her question, because the blue dog in question had come bounding up to them and was now covering them in slobbery licks. "Hector," Coco said, "what are you doing here?"
"Surprise,"
said their old friend Hector, the golden retriever, who was now sitting back on his haunches and smiling at them.
"I travelled all the way just to be here for this. Camo invited me, but he promised to keep it a secret because I wanted to surprise you."
"And it really is a surprise," Kira said, throwing her arms around Hector. "A wonderful surprise."
"Oops," said Hector. "Gotta dash. It's my turn to strut my stuff."
And off he padded to go on the catwalk, Coco and Kira watching him go with great big smiles on their faces. They were ever so happy to see their old friend again. Kira glanced up at the scoreboard where Buck was busy arranging the numbers. Lots of the scores were already up, and it seemed like, at the moment, the swan in the banana skin was in the lead. But then it was Coco's go. He was dressed as a wizard, with a coat and round-rimmed glasses and a scar on his forehead. In his hand, he clutched a wand. He stepped out onto the stage and waved his wand in the air. And somehow, Kira had no idea how he had done it, a fountain of brilliant golden sparks flowed out at the end of the wand. The crowd burst into whoops of delight, and when Coco made his way back down the catwalk, the scores that Camo and his cousins held up put him off into the lead. "All right, Kira," said Coco, grinning with the joy of going out onto the catwalk. "You're up next." Kira took a deep breath and checked her costume. She was wearing a red dress with a pipe cleaner twirled into a spiral attached to the back. And when she lifted up the pink pig's head from the floor and placed it on her head, the complete image was revealed. "You're Peppa Pig," said Coco, smiling. "You look brilliant. One of my favourites. Now, off you go." And Kira stepped out onto the catwalk. The lights were flashing. The crowd were cheering. She took a few steps forward, and the excitement of the moment eclipsed any little nerves she was feeling. She took a few more steps, strutting her stuff, letting her little piggy pipe cleaner tail wiggle behind her. At the end of the catwalk, she did a twirl and walked back. And when she returned to backstage, Coco clapped her on the back. "Look, Kira," he said, pointing at the scoreboard. "Now you're winning." "Oh," she said, rather surprised. "Hooray!" It seemed that against all odds, Kira might win after all. But there was still one contestant left. Now Snaffles stepped onto stage. Cute, fluffy Snaffles, whose costume was, well, it was just brilliant. He had dressed up as a minion, with a blue boiler suit and a hat and big googly goggles. He looked just like a minion. It was uncanny. And the crowd loved him. There were claps and hoots of appreciation as Snaffles waddled down the catwalk, doing his very best minion dance. "If it were me," Kira whispered to Coco, "I'd vote for Snaffles. He's amazing. I don't mind losing out on first place to him." "Let's see," Coco said. "I think it's going to be close." And as it turned out, it was close. Very close indeed. Camo and his cousins raised their scores. Buck counted them up and climbed the ladder to place the final score on the board. And Snaffles had won. He had pipped Kira to the post by just 1 point. And though Kira felt one small twinge of regret, which was only natural, more than anything she felt happy for Snaffles. His Halloween costume was so brilliant that he deserved his winnings. She was just so happy that she had even taken part in the competition, that Camo had organised such a fun night for them all to celebrate Halloween together. Now Camo was on the stage, showing Snaffles the towering pile of pumpkin pies he had just won. But then Camo looked down, for Snaffles was tapping him on the leg and lifting a hand as though asking for Camo's microphone. Frowning slightly, Camo handed it down, and Snaffles raised the microphone to his mouth. "I am very proud to have won the Halloween costume competition," he said. "But the truth is, I think everyone here is a winner tonight. There couldn't be a more astounding array of creepy costumes and frightening fits. So I can't just accept this pumpkin prize all to myself. This is for everyone. Let's all tuck in and have a Halloween feast together." With these words, Snaffles took a couple of pies from the pile and started handing them out to the audience members. He caught Kira's eye and beckoned her up. "Yours was my favourite costume," Snaffles said, handing her a pie. "And yours was mine," Kira told him. "Well," Snaffles said, "that makes us both winners." He handed Kira a pie, which she ate a mouthful of gratefully. And so it was that all of the residents of Sleepy Forest celebrated Halloween together. Plate after plate of pumpkin pie got passed around, until everyone's bellies were full, and quite miraculously, there was still plenty left over. So it seemed like the Foresters would be enjoying pumpkin pie for many days to come. They danced on the stage, they boogied down the catwalk, they dazzled each other with all their costumes. And by the time people started getting sleepy, the full moon was already high and shining in the sky, turning the leaves of the forest trees into thousands of gleaming silver coins. One by one, the sleepy foresters yawned, hugged each other goodbye, and drifted home, until at last the only folks left were Coco, Kira, and Camo. Coco and Kira had decided to help their friend clear everything up, and once it was done, they themselves turned, all together, to make their way back through the winding forest paths, back to their homes. They were tired and content. Camo's skin had turned its sleepiest colour, dark green to match the moss and the lichen, and Kira had taken off her Peppa Pig head and was carrying it along beside her. Coco rubbed his eyes sleepily with the back of his paw. "So, Camo," Kira said, "are you happy with how your first ever Halloween costume competition went?" "You know what?" Camo replied. "I am. I'm very happy, indeed. Didn't you think it was a fun night?" "Oh, yes," Kira said. "I thought it was one of the most fun nights ever." "Me too," Coco agreed, after he'd just recovered from stifling a yawn. "I think you should throw a Halloween costume competition every year." Camo smiled at him. "I was just thinking the same myself, actually," he said. "Hey, Camo," Kira asked, "for when you throw it next year, would you do anything differently?" "Just one thing," Camo told her. "And what's that?" Kira asked. "For next year's competition," Camo said, "I'm going to be taking part." The three friends laughed at that. Of course Camo would be taking part, and he'd probably win it too. And they linked arms and continued to walk through the kind and familiar forest. They passed Camo's grotto first, and Coco and Kira gave him a big hug and watched as he slipped into the grotto cave. Then just the two of them walked arm in arm through the whispering trees until they reached the cozy cabin in the woods. Their mum was waiting for them at the table and gave them each a kiss on the top of the head before, sleepily indeed, they climbed up to bed. And you know what? That night, Coco and Kira were so tired from all the fun of the competition that they didn't have the energy to take off their costumes. They just climbed into bed exactly how they were and fell asleep so swiftly that when their mum came upstairs just a few minutes later to wish them good night, what did she find in the beds but a sleeping wizard and an adorable little gently snoring pig? She shook her head and smiled and switched off the light. "Good night, Coco. Good night, Kira," she whispered into the dark before shutting their door as quietly as possible and taking herself to bed too. The Sleepy Halloween Train by Jane Thomas. Coco is running along a corridor. "Woo!" he calls as he goes, his arms held out in front of him. Woo! I'm coming for you! Kira giggles and rushes into her room. She's about to close the door when she hears a bump, a thump, and a muffled ow. Coco has ended up in a crumpled pile on the floor and he's fighting with the bedsheet, trying to get it off his head. Kira wants to help, but she's too busy laughing at him wrestling with the big white sheet. Coco eventually frees himself and rubs his head, a grin on his face. I don't think I put the eye holes in the right place, he says, giving the wall a glare. That's what you get for dressing up as a ghost and trying to scare me, says Kira. Anyway, I thought we said you'd be a skeleton this year. She's right, as she so often is. Coco and Kira have agreed to go on the Halloween train, dressed traditionally as a skeleton and a big round orange pumpkin. They've spent ages making their costumes. Coco making a stretchy suit patterned with bones, and then helping Kira with her ginormous pumpkin out of a cardboard box, bits of foam, and a lot more orange paint than they'd expected. It's an especially enormous, prize-winning pumpkin they end up creating for the little panda. The Halloween train comes by every year, whisking creatures from Sleepy Forest off on a magical train ride to the biggest pumpkin patch you've ever seen. It's so big, it takes Captain Feathers of Albatross Airways a full 15 minutes to fly from one side to the other. There are rows and rows of pumpkins, ranging in size from those as small as a curled-up mouse to some as big as a decent-sized hippo. It's the perfect place for all the animals to go and get their Halloween pumpkins and bring them home for carving, ready to be placed out on their doorstep with flickering candles and twinkling fairy lights inside. Once Coco is disentangled from his sheet, he helps Kira climb into the cardboard box pumpkin they made earlier. Then Coco puts on his skeleton suit and turns around for Kira to help with the zip. She tries her best to help him, but her arms are now mostly inside the pumpkin, so she can't be particularly useful. But eventually, with a bit of a wiggle and a lot of a jiggle, Coco is zipped up and dressed as well. They walk side by side to the train station, picking up friends along the way, so by the time they arrive at Sleepy Forest Central, there's quite a gaggle of the traditional pumpkins, cats, and friendly witches, along with a clutch of firefighters, adorable dinosaurs, and more. Together, Cuddle the Puggle and her kangaroo friend Kevin make up a bright pink horse. They all stand around on the platform, an air of excitement building as the time of the train's arrival gets closer and closer. Then they hear a whistle in the distance, and everyone cranes their necks to see, spotting a plume of smoke that gets bigger and bigger as the Halloween Express nears. Finally, the bright orange train chugs into the station, a squeal of brakes, and a final puff of smoke, bringing it to a halt. A frazzled flamingo, who more often than not is on the Salty Wallop Express, but once a year takes on the role of conductor on the Halloween train, leaps out and starts opening all the doors, ushering the creatures of Sleepy Forest aboard. Kira needs a little help squeezing through the doors, since she and Coco created such a very plump costume. But finally, with a satisfying pop and a plop, they're through, and finding seats in the carriages. Silver and gold cobwebs have been hung from the ceilings, and on all the tables are smiling carved pumpkins lit from inside by fireflies that dart around and around. The flamingo, conductor's cap sat at an angle, dashes through the carriages, checking everyone is aboard, reading out names from his clipboard, and then rushing to the next carriage and repeating the process. When he's quite sure nobody has been left behind, he leaps outside and runs along the platform, closing all the doors, all the while blowing his whistle. With a final toot of the whistle and one last giant long-legged leap, in a puff of pink feathers the flamingo dives back onto the train and it sets off. The flamingo rushes through the carriages, giving out bags of goodies to everyone. Coco reaches in and finds marshmallows in the shape of ghosts, and witches made from licorice, and tiny orange pumpkins that are really hard candy with a gooey, sticky, delicious caramel centre. There are spiders' webs made from spun sugar, and toffee apples, and candy floss, and huge muffins from Betty Badger's bakery that are each decorated with a smiling skeleton made from icing. The thing is, with Kira being in a huge pumpkin outfit with only little bits of her arms poking out, she finds it incredibly hard to eat anything. Her hands don't reach her mouth. But after a little experimenting, they soon realise that Coco can feed Kira her treats. So they sit there, a skeleton feeding a pumpkin, passing ghosts and witches and spiders' webs across the table. The Halloween train rattles along, carriages filled with chatter. Outside, the huge orange pumpkin of the sun has already settled into its bed, and stars have come out to light up the sky. All the owls and bats of Sleepy Forest have gathered to follow the train, so there are hundreds of them fluttering about in the darkness and swooping through the skies. It's their special night of gathering to have huge parties, meeting up with distant cousins, second cousins twice removed, that sort of thing, who they haven't seen since last year's Halloween festival. Sometimes they just fly around, clouds of bats heading in no particular direction, and sometimes they organise themselves so they can fly together and look exactly like a witch on a broomstick heading up towards the stars, or a giant pumpkin somehow floating through the sky with masses of fireflies lighting up the inside. Coco and Kira head to the end of the carriage and pull down the window of the door so the cold night air rushes in and ruffles their fur. And they wave at the owls that come swooping by, wings outspread, eyes wide and smiling, performing tricks and manoeuvres that they've spent the last year practicing. An upside-down owl doing a loop-the-loop at top speed, all the while keeping up with the chugging train, is really quite something. As they watch, the bats take on the shape of a black cat, flying by on a broom. Kira remembers she learned a poem about a train in school. She scratches her head trying to remember how it goes. As they dash through a station, the poem comes back a little more clearly. She sees hedgerows all lit up from within by glowworms, and distant hills are silhouetted against the sky that's now bright with stars. And she remembers a little more of the poem. She taps her paw up and down on the edge of the carriage in time to the train, feeling its rhythm as it rushes along the tracks. Faster than fairies, faster than witches, bridges and houses, hedges and ditches, and charging along like troops in a battle, all through the meadows, the horses and cattle, all of the sights of the hill and the plain, fly as thick as driving rain, and ever again in the wink of an eye, painted stations whistle by. Coco smiles at his sister, seeing her with her eyes closed, paw beating out the rhythm, frowning a little as she tries to remember all the words. "I like those first lines," says Coco. "The bit about faster than fairies, faster than witches." As if they've heard, the bats take up a new formation, and suddenly there is a fairy dashing along beside the train, her wings outstretched and her skirts flapping in the wind, and a golden wand clutched in her hand is lit by a gathering of fireflies. Coco and Kira applaud the bats, who all smile and wave and then flutter off back to the party in the sky. The frazzled flamingo comes dashing past, reminding everyone they must step down from the train in neat, orderly lines when they arrive at Pumpkin Patch Station in a few minutes' time. And everyone nods and solemnly promises they'll behave. Of course, after the train screeches into the station with a squeal of brakes and a final puff of smoke rushes past the windows, everyone looks at everyone else, gives a squeak of excitement and charges for the doors. So it is that animals squeeze their way onto the platform, some emerging from the jammed doorways with a satisfying pop sound. Coco and Kira's perfect pumpkin costumes aren't quite as round by the time they emerge. They've been a bit squashed against walls and doorways, but it's fine. They're still very obviously something that's almost nearly, probably a pumpkin. Cuddle and Kevin get temporarily separated so they can disembark, and there's half a horse trotting one way, and the back legs trotting another for a while, before somebody matches them up and they're complete again. The flamingo just sighs and chuckles. It happens every year. Every single year, he asks everyone to leave the train in a quiet and orderly manner. And every year, they promise. And every year, they get too excited and this chaos happens. Still, he has a bit of peace now, so he takes his damp lavender-scented cloth, places it gently over his eyes, and settles down for a rest among the comfy cushions of his seat. In an hour's time, he'll need to get everyone back on board and home to Sleepy Forest. But for now, he can have some moments of calm. The moon is huge and round and orange, and has taken over the sun's role of being the giant pumpkin in the sky. The stars are all extra pointy and perfect and bright, as if they're glowing ends of witches' wands floating around the night sky. Everything is so bright and clear that the pumpkin patch almost seems to glow in the darkness. Now that they're out of the cosy carriages, everyone starts putting on hats and scarves and gloves. It doesn't matter that a ghost wouldn't normally have a bright red scarf wrapped 3 times around its neck, or a pumpkin wouldn't normally have a blue hat on top of it. After all, there's something quite wonderful about being out at night when you can see your breath in the air, all silver by the light of the moon. But there's only something wonderful about it if you're nice and warm at the same time. Coco and Kira have decided they're going to get one ginormous pumpkin between them this year, rather than one smaller one each. As you head along the pumpkin patch field, the pumpkins get bigger and bigger, which means the heavier the pumpkin, the further you have to carry it. Some of the mice and squirrels and smaller creatures of Sleepy Forest stick near where the Halloween train drops them off, rolling pumpkins sometimes only the size of golf balls back towards the train. But some of the larger creatures, the elephants, the rhinos and the like, start trotting towards the far side of the field. Their policy when it comes to pumpkins is go big or go home. Coco and Kira set off after them, 2 squashed pumpkins bouncing up and down and jiggling about as they jog along the rows. Meanwhile, Cuddle and Kevin have realised they need to get one pumpkin between them, because it's jolly hard being half a horse and carrying a whole pumpkin by yourself. And they're sat discussing what size they're going to get. They've both sat down and turned to each other, which makes for one very peculiar-looking bright pink horse, all hunched up in the middle of a pumpkin patch. Coco and Kira keep on going, past the pumpkins as big as a curled-up cat, past the pumpkins that would make a very solid side table, and past the pumpkins as big as Kira's snow-white panda belly. Eventually, they come to the pumpkins so big they aren't quite sure they'll fit through the train doors, and they decide they've gone far enough. Looking around, Coco and Kira can see that hardly anyone else has come this far, and those that have are already on their way back to the station. An elephant salutes them with his trunk as he sets off, great head pushing against a giant pumpkin almost as big as him. A rhino spears his pumpkin on his horn and then trots off down the row, unable to see anything of where he's going and relying on his resident oxpecker friend to guide the way. As they reach the exit to the pumpkin patch, an owl with little round glasses perched on his nose checks names off a list. Everyone can pick one pumpkin and one pumpkin only. That's the policy. A tiny pumpkin that could fit in a thimble is worth just as much as a pumpkin that could be carved into a decent-sized carriage. It isn't only the creatures of Sleepy Forest who will come here tonight, you see. So the owl has to make sure everyone gets a chance to take a pumpkin home with them. Coco and Kira finally make their selection and start pushing it back up the field. They try carrying it, but it's enormous and far too heavy, so their only choice is to roll it. Kira is the first to remove her woolly hat, and shortly afterwards, Coco removes his too. It's getting hot. They take off their scarves and then their gloves, and it isn't long before they're there huffing and puffing away in the darkness in nothing more than their costumes. If anything, the pumpkin seems to get heavier as they go, probably because it's picking up mud from the field with each and every roll. Ba-bum, it goes. Breathe. Push. Ba-bum. Breathe. Brace. Push. Ba-bum. And so it goes on, for step after tired step, Coco sometimes peering around the side to see if the finish line is any closer, but somehow it never seems to be. He decides to count steps for a while to see if that helps. 1, he whispers to himself, pushing his feet into the ground. 2, as he presses his shoulder into the giant pumpkin. 3, pushing and waiting to hear the ba-bum as the pumpkin rolls a little further forwards. 4, breathing deeply and slowly, focusing on the job. 5, pushing as hard as he can so Kira can push a little less. 6, watching the owl go swooping by overhead, keeping track of where everyone is in the field. 7, feeling his legs pushing against the weight of the pumpkin. 8, waiting for another ba-bum as the pumpkin rolls again. 9, closing his eyes and squeezing them shut as he focuses. 10, pressing the pumpkin with his paws and his shoulders as hard as he can. Coco looks up again and sees they've moved forwards and they're getting closer and closer, inch by inch. Faster than fairies, faster than witches, he mutters to himself as he keeps pushing. Bridges and houses, hedges and ditches. He smiles as he thinks really it should be slower than sloths and slower than snails, inching along like a boat with no sails. They're just a few meters from the exit owl, and almost everyone is back on board with their pumpkins. Even Cuddle and Kevin, who finally agreed to get 2 medium-sized ones over a couple of trips, when the flamingo removes his lavender towel and steps from his guard's van and blows the whistle to let everyone know it's a few minutes before the Halloween train departs. Coco and Kira look at each other with alarm, and then press their shoulders against the pumpkin again and keep on pushing. From the train comes the sound of cheering as everyone starts shouting encouragement at them. "Come on, Coco, you can do it," calls Fritz, leaping up and down in the window of the carriage. "You've got this, Kira. Keep going," shouts Prickles through a mouthful of ghost marshmallows. As they pass the owl, he runs his beak down the list, then checks off their names, and they start to push the giant pumpkin onto the platform. There are hisses of steam and clouds of smoke as the train begins to wake up. And by now, all the bats and owls in the sky are fluttering above the station, cheering Coco and Kira and shouting down to them. It is Mumbles the elephant who helps the most, though, stepping down from the carriage and squeezing the pumpkin through the doors. He scoops up Coco and Kira with his trunk and hauls them into the carriage, so the train can blow its whistle and start to pull away from the station. The flamingo gives an exhausted toot of his whistle, which is barely heard by anyone, so loud is the applause for the brother and sister who got the very biggest pumpkin on board. There is chatter for a while, everyone comparing pumpkins and saying how they're going to carve them and how hard it was to pick exactly the right one. And then the flamingo comes through and asks everyone to stand up, so they stand in the aisle, and he bustles about with the seats and the tables, and suddenly everything is transformed, and there are rows of bunk beds lining the carriages. On one of the beds is a rolled-up blanket and a big, plump pillow, and there are little curtains that can be closed, so every animal can disappear into a cosy little nook and nap their way back to Sleepy Forest. Coco is so tired from pushing the pumpkin, he can barely climb the ladder up to his upper bunk, but he clambers up. 1 step, 2 steps, 3 steps, finally 4 steps, and he falls onto his bed. He unrolls the blanket and wraps it around himself, pulling it right up to his chin and curling up in a tight little ball in his bed. The pillow is so soft beneath his head, and, with the curtains closed and the train's gentle rhythmic rattle as it rumbles along the tracks, it's only moments before he's fast asleep. That night, as the train heads through the darkness, faster than fairies, faster than witches, bridges and houses, hedges and ditches, Coco dreams of flying on the back of an owl over the pumpkin patch. The owl swoops and soars, great wings outstretched, and Coco is soft and warm, buried in his feathers, and together they rise high, high into the sky, so high, even the biggest pumpkins become so tiny they're just like grains of sand. So high they're rising above the tallest trees of Sleepy Forest, looking down on the silver river that threads its way this way and that. So high that Coco can reach out and touch the stars. It's The Comfy Pumpkin by Alicia Ainsley. It was Halloween night on Strawberry Avenue, and the street was decorated perfectly for the occasion. The front of each house had been tastefully dressed in spooky decorations and decked out with mystical candlelight. A warm glow emanated from every porch where pumpkins lay, inviting trick-or-treaters to the door. On one particular porch sat a perfectly round, bright orange pumpkin. The pumpkin was named Sprout, and Sprout beamed glorious candlelight from within his friendly, smiley face. The green root on the top of his head curled upwards like a corkscrew, creating the illusion of wacky hair on top of his brow, and his skin was as smooth as silk. He was a practically perfect pumpkin. Above his head, black, green and orange bunting hung from the porch beams, and across the door, a banner reading "Trick or Treat" welcomed visitors to its threshold. Electric candles glowed from within the front window of the house, and black paper bats had been stuck to the pane for decoration. Sprout's porch was tastefully decorated for the occasion, and he was the festive finishing touch. Sprout the pumpkin watched the families who lived on Strawberry Avenue walk past his porch, up and down the street, dressed in costumes, knocking on each other's doors. He spotted a little boy dressed as a superhero and a girl donning a witch's hat with a broom. He even saw a baby dressed as an adorable pumpkin being carried in their mother's arms. Sprout loved seeing what the children had chosen as their costumes. The words, "Trick or treat," rang out regularly from hopeful young voices, while laughter and delight rippled from older ones. Every so often, soft footsteps would trample up the wooden steps onto his porch and stop at the front door by his side. Homemade cakes would be dished out from within, and happy little feet would scurry away with a "Thank you." Halloween was truly one of the most fun nights of the year, and Sprout was proud to play such a pivotal role in it. What was Halloween without pumpkins, after all? As the night drew on and the sky faded to black, the glow of the street gradually dimmed, and the sounds of people trudging up and down slowed to barely a whisper. The children of Strawberry Avenue would soon be tucked up in their beds, exhausted from all the excitement. Their face paint would be washed off, and their costumes would be retired until next year, as they dreamed of what they would enjoy from their bag of candy the next day. Sprout the pumpkin sighed with satisfaction, and his wide smile stretched a little bit wider. He wondered what he would do once Halloween was over. Halloween night was the pinnacle of every pumpkin's career. What would be next for Sprout in his journey, he wondered. Whatever it was, he was looking forward to finding out. All of a sudden, Sprout noticed a scratching sound coming from the other side of the porch. "Hello," Sprout called out curiously. He listened as the scratching drew closer and closer, until the sound more resembled scampering footsteps. Out of the shadows and into the dim light of the porch stepped a mouse. The mouse wore a red dress with a green square patch on the side of its skirt, and a long stick with a bundle attached to the end was slung over their shoulder. "Good evening," replied the mouse. "I'm Bramble. I'm sorry if I disturbed you." Sprout smiled and assured her she hadn't disturbed him. He was still enjoying the last of the night's celebrations. "Ah, yes, I love Halloween too," she grinned enthusiastically. "Would you mind if I rested here a minute or two? My feet are sore from so much walking." Bramble the mouse set down her bundle of belongings on the porch and sat next to Sprout the pumpkin, gazing out at the street. She pulled a tiny wedge of cheese from out of the patchwork square on her skirt, which turned out to be a makeshift pocket. She offered Sprout some cheese, but he politely declined. "Do pumpkins eat?" Bramble asked, intrigued. Sprout replied that they did not. "So, what do you do all day, then?" Bramble pried, nibbling her snack with her long front teeth. Sprout thought and responded, "I watch the world go by. I listen to the owl's song. I watch the wind blow crispy leaves through the air. I enjoy the warmth from the candle that burns inside me. I admire the stars and track the moon. I greet passers-by with my smile. It might not sound like much, but I quite like my peaceful existence." Bramble sighed. That all sounded nice. Bramble ate the last of her chunk of cheese and confessed, "I've never stayed anywhere long enough to enjoy all those things, but it does sound lovely. I've always dreamed of having my own house from which I could look out the windows and admire the view. It would be in a meadow with wildflowers and lavender, or be by the sea so that I could watch dolphins and whales dance in the water." "Why don't you have a house?" Sprout asked. Bramble shrugged. "I've just not found the right place yet." Then Bramble glanced at Sprout and said, "You'd make a very nice house, you know. I'm not trying to say that you should be my house, but if you were, you would be a very nice one. Your 2 square eyes would make excellent windows, and your smiley mouth is perfect as a doorway. Of course, you'd need to hang curtains up to keep out the street light, but those are easily made." Sprout chuckled at Bramble's observation. He had never thought of himself as being a suitable house for anyone. He'd only seen himself as a pumpkin, nothing else. Maybe there were many things that Sprout could become that he had never thought of before. "What else?" Sprout encouraged her, delighting in the fantasy. "What else would you do with me if I were your house?" Bramble's whiskers twitched with a smile. She liked this game. She jumped up to her feet and walked up close to Sprout. "May I?" she asked politely. Sprout opened his mouth a little wider, and Bramble the mouse tottered inside, inspecting the pumpkin. She hummed as she took in the place. "There's plenty of room in here for someone as small as I am. You could fit a bed over there," she said, pointing to one corner. "And you could set up a little stove over there by the candle. And there's even space for an armchair or 2 right by the window. It's a pretty perfect space." Sprout's smile widened with pride. Perhaps she was right. Perhaps he would make a perfect house for someone tiny. Bramble reached out to touch the wall as she pondered. "Right here, you could put up some shelves." But as her furry hands grazed the inside of the pumpkin, Sprout erupted into giggles and shuddered. "That tickles," he laughed. Bramble pulled her hand away quickly and giggled too. "Oops, sorry," she tittered. Bramble continued to whimsically design Sprout the pumpkin's interior, envisioning how she would like her dream house to look. She described the yellow and pink curtains she would hang from the windows and stitch together herself. She explained how she would build wooden flower boxes to drape from the window ledges and fill them with wildflowers like sunny primrose and violet foxglove. Every morning, she would pick fresh bouquets from the nearby fields and arrange them in a vase on the dining table she would fashion out of a cotton wheel. As for the armchairs, she would only begin with one. After all, there was only one of her, and she didn't expect much company to begin with. Bramble humbly boasted that she was rather good with a needle and some string, and she could easily whip up a floral armchair for herself with a scrap of old fabric and a bundle of fluff. Her bed would be easily constructed from a discarded tuna can and stuffed with hay to make a comfortable mattress and pillows. Then she would pull her patchwork quilt over her and lie there, gazing at the stars out of the nearby window. Bramble smiled wistfully and stopped her designing as she looked around the pumpkin, visualizing it all. Sprout didn't want her to stop. It sounded wonderful. Yes, you would make an excellent house, Bramble exhaled, dropping to the floor and rubbing her sore, weary feet. Sprout the pumpkin felt inspired by Bramble's creativity. He could picture everything she described in his mind. He could be magnificent, and above all, he would have a purpose beyond Halloween night. Providing a home for a wandering soul was a special honor. And with winter approaching, more animals than ever would need a house to retreat from the cold into. Creatures just like Bramble the mouse. Sprout watched Bramble rub her feet and paused. He knew he didn't have the views that Bramble had described for her dream house. There was no ocean outside or meadow full of blooms. But there was a rather delightful street full of welcoming people and animals. Christmas would arrive on Strawberry Avenue soon, too, with its twinkling fairy lights and elaborate trees. And in the summer, the residents pruned glorious, colourful beds of flowers. Strawberry Avenue was always a delight for the eyes. Bramble, Sprout approached hopefully. Feel free to say no, but if you wanted, I would be honoured to be a house for you. Bramble gasped with surprise. She hadn't expected Sprout to offer. She hadn't expected anything at all. She had just let her imagination get carried away with itself. Bramble stuttered. I wouldn't want to impose, Sprout. I'm sure you would prefer not to have me scampering around while you're trying to enjoy your quiet life. Sprout giggled and assured her that he would adore the company. Excitement bubbled inside Bramble until it practically flowed out of her. Oh, yes, please, Sprout. I would absolutely love to. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Bramble wasted no time in setting to work, turning her dream house into a reality. The little mouse promptly unpacked her belongings from the bundle she carried. She didn't possess much, only a few special trinkets, a needle, and a patchwork quilt. But Bramble was handy, and her imagination and skills seemed to reach no end. She collected the components she needed and set straight to work building her perfect humble abode inside Sprout the Pumpkin's orange walls. She dragged an empty fish can out of the house's recycling to make her bed and found a tiny dry paint pot she could use as a dining table. She plucked blades of grass from the garden to make a mattress and stuffed them inside the fish can before laying her patchwork quilt on top. In the trash, Bramble found an old cuddly toy that would be perfect for her armchair once she pulled the stuffing out. So she set to work collecting small twigs to form the base of the chair. Using her needle and some string, she tied the twigs in place, filled the gaps with stuffing, and draped a piece of fallen bunting from the porch over the top. She stitched the material tightly to the frame, and Sprout was very impressed to see a fully fledged armchair sitting there within next to no time. Lastly, Bramble thrifted a discarded tatty scarf off the street, made from rouge and gold thread, which she declared would be perfect for her curtains. Everything was falling into place as if it was meant to be. Sprout watched the little mouse determinedly design her new house and felt warm inside. And not just because of the candle. He was excited to see what it would be like to play the part of a house for a mouse. Once Bramble was finished stitching up the curtains, sourcing some shelves and setting up a cooking pot, she boiled some water on the stove. She looked around as she patiently waited. Bramble still had much to do to finish transforming Sprout into her dream house, but she was content with the progress she'd made in such a short amount of time. The little mouse yawned and stretched her arms above her head. She was starting to grow tired. "I can't wait to see what tomorrow brings now that I have a new comfy home," she professed. "It will be fun to see all the people who live on the street." Sprout noticed a rustle in a bush across the road and smiled knowingly. He said, "You could meet someone who frequents Strawberry Avenue right now, if you like." Bramble peered out the window to see who Sprout was referring to and spotted a plump, grey figure with a long black and white striped tail tottering down the path in front of the house opposite. "Who is that?" Bramble asked. Sprout answered, "That is Munchie. Munchie often visits Strawberry Avenue because the families like to give him food when he comes by." Bramble giggled as she watched the greedy raccoon across the road scamper onto the porch opposite and pick at a bowl of candy that had been left by the front door. Sprout called over to Munchie the raccoon and beckoned him over. He told him he had someone for him to meet. With a mouth stuffed full of sweets, the ravenous raccoon waddled across the street towards them. "Good evening, Sprout," Munchie greeted through his mouthful. "Don't you love Halloween? There's always the best treats lying around." Sprout laughed and reminded Munchie that he wasn't particularly interested in food, but more about the decorations and the joy and laughter that emanated from each household. Munchie agreed that was nice too, but the leftover candy definitely made the night even better. Munchie was surprised when he noticed the little mouse face staring at him from within Sprout's left eye. He gulped and knelt down to look closer. "Sprout, did you know that you have a mouse living inside you?" he questioned curiously. Sprout chortled with amusement, and Bramble smiled her brightest smile. "I've only just moved in," she told Munchie excitedly. "I'm Bramble. It's nice to meet you." Munchie shook her tiny hand through the window and welcomed her to the neighborhood. Munchie felt his tummy grumble. No matter how much he ate, he was never quite full. "Any chance you got some cheese in there?" Munchie tried. But Bramble didn't have any food yet. She would need to go foraging tomorrow to stock up the shelves in her new humble abode. Alternatively, she politely invited Munchie to join her one day for afternoon tea, which he unsurprisingly accepted. Bramble was delighted to make a new friend. Sprout watched their interaction proudly, happy to have helped introduce them. After a few minutes of getting to know each other, Munchie left Bramble to enjoy her first night in her new house and wished Sprout a peaceful evening. The raccoon continued on his trawl of the neighborhood, scrounging for dropped treats and tapping on windows for leftover scraps of dinner. Bramble contentedly returned to her cooking pot and, using a ladle, poured herself a cup of tea. She happily settled down in her bed of grass with her tiny cup and a sigh. Ah, she exhaled after swallowing a sip of tea. Yes, I like it here. I can see perfectly outside through your left eye like a window. I only wish it weren't night time so that I could properly admire the view of the street. Her comment gave Sprout an idea. He offered, In my opinion, I think nighttime has some of the best views. If you like, I could show you. Bramble nodded her fuzzy head with intrigue, and Sprout the pumpkin began to shudder softly. To Bramble's amazement, Sprout uncovered the roof of his head, where his stalk protruded, opening up a window in his roof to the night sky. From Bramble's bed, she now had a perfect view of the glimmering moon and the shimmering stars. Starlight shone down into the pumpkin, illuminating the room with a subtle silver glow. Bramble grinned and admired the night from her personal skylight as she drank her tea. I hadn't even noticed it was a full moon tonight until now, she commented contentedly. Bramble and Sprout stargazed together for a while, identifying the constellations and discussing the mystic of the moon. Bramble taught Sprout how to identify the North Star in the sky from the end of the Big Dipper constellation. Bramble attributed the North Star to being her guide through the night when she wandered. Meanwhile, Sprout taught Bramble about the moon's life cycle and how the moon controls the tides of the Earth's oceans. They agreed that the night sky was the most interesting time of day because it provided a window into the universe beyond their world. Bramble had just finished her cup of tea when she cried out, "Sprout, did you see that shooting star?" She pointed to a wisp of white smoke in the sky. Sprout had seen it too. "Did you remember to make a wish?" she checked. "The most powerful wish magic comes from shooting stars." Sprout chuckled and assured her he had. But, in reality, he hadn't felt the need to make a wish. In the space of one evening, he felt like all his wishes had come true. He didn't need to make another one. Sprout was pleased to have a new purpose. Now that he had Bramble to care for and keep him company, he didn't want for anything else. As midnight approached, Bramble's eyes grew heavier and heavier, and her furry body melted into the soft blades of grass. She pulled her patchwork quilt up to her shoulders and snuggled in. She closed her eyes. Her breathing slowed. Each breath became deeper. Just as Sprout thought Bramble had fallen asleep, she whispered from her bed, "Actually, I was wrong about you, Sprout. You don't make an excellent house after all. You make an excellent home." Sprout was confused. What was the difference between a house and a home, he asked. Bramble responded, "A house is the four walls that you live and sleep in. But a home is where you feel safe and belong. You make an excellent home, Sprout." Sprout beamed silently. He didn't say it, but he, too, felt like he had finally found a home with Bramble, the sweet, wondering mouse. As the stars twinkled overhead, Bramble drifted off in her soft fish-can bed, snoring gently as dreams overtook her mind. Sprout retracted the roof of his pumpkin head back into place and dimmed the candle inside of him to the faintest ember, keeping Bramble warm against the October night air as she slept. Sprout then closed his eyes and began to dream. But instead of dreaming about pumpkin patches and crunchy autumn leaves, he dreamt of another day where he and Bramble would watch the world go by and enjoy the simplest of life's pleasures with each other for company. Sprout felt excited for the future that lay ahead beyond Halloween night. After a while, the door to the house opened, and a little girl called Darcy stepped out onto the porch. She looked at the pumpkin she and her mother had carefully groomed the day before and peered closer. Something seemed different. When she saw Bramble the mouse peacefully curled up inside, she gasped with delight. "Mummy, come look," Darcy whispered back into the house. Her mother joined her on the porch and gasped with adoration when she saw Bramble the mouse sleeping soundly inside Sprout's pumpkin body. "Oh, how adorable," her mother gushed. Darcy asked her mother what they should do. It seemed unfair to move the pumpkin when a mouse had made such a cozy nest in it. They agreed that they should leave the sleeping pair be. They looked far too peaceful to move. Sprout the pumpkin and his new mouse friend could stay on their porch as long as they wanted. Darcy and her mummy tiptoed back inside their home, hoping not to disturb the little mouse house, and turned off the porch light. The candles in the window turned off and the curtains closed. The house fell dark as the family turned off all their lights for bed. Only the street lights and the starlight remained to provide vision in the night. On that quiet porch, Sprout the pumpkin and Bramble the mouse slept tranquilly beneath the moonlight, safe in the knowledge that they had both found a new home in each other. We're drifting towards dreams now, the happiest, loveliest dreams you've ever dreamt. We're calm and cozy. Your breathing is relaxed and you can feel that lovely weight of the blanket keeping you safe and warm. Aren't you comfy? You are so warm and cozy, so sleepy. As you drift into dreams, count all the things you're grateful for. Let yourself fill up with all of the little moments that made you smile today. See the faces of the people that made you laugh. Think of the things that challenged you. Think of the things you learned and the practice that meant you'll be a little bit better tomorrow than you were today. Think about how warm and cozy and sleepy you are here in your bed. What a day you had. Wonderful things lie ahead for you too. You will have wonderful adventures tomorrow and the next day and the one after that. The whole world is waiting for you. But there's no rush. There's nothing more to do today. All that's left for today is rest, deep, cozy sleep. The most beautiful of dreams are waiting for you now. That's why you're drifting off, gently, into dreamland. So keep breathing slowly. Let yourself get toasty warm. Let your eyelids stay heavy. And know that you are safe. Remember that you are smart. You are brave. You are kind. And you are loved. Think it to yourself. I am smart. I am brave. I am kind. I am loved. You are a dream. When tomorrow comes, you'll face it with a smile, because you are smart, brave, kind and loved. Because you are you, uniquely, wonderfully you. What kind of dream are you drifting towards tonight? You can dream however you want, because your imagination is as wide as the universe. What will you find in tonight's dream? Maybe you'll see your favourite characters. Is that Hector and Sunny over there? Maybe you'll visit the moon, where there's mice eating cheese in the craters. Maybe you'll walk through Sleepy Forest, where Coco the koala is strumming his pink ukulele on the banks of Sleepy River. Let your imagination take you away. Your dreams are all yours, and you deserve the sweetest dreams of all, because you are brave, you are kind, and you are loved. You are brave, you are kind, and you are loved. And you are wonderfully, uniquely you. You are a dream, and it's time to sleep, tucked up in your bed. Breathe slowly and melt into your bed. Isn't it warm and soft and cozy? It's time to rest. Take deep breaths in and out and let yourself relax as you say goodbye to the day. Let your body get even heavier. Let your whole body go floppy. Drift deeper into sleep with every breath and say goodnight. Remember, tomorrow will be a good day because you have a big heart. You are a good friend. You believe in yourself. You know there's nothing better to be than yourself. It's okay to get things wrong. It's okay to ask for help. You can do whatever you set your mind to. Be proud to be different. Be proud of your achievements. Be proud of yourself. You are a good learner. You are a good listener. You are a good example to others. You are valued. You are loved. You are sleepy. So drift off now, little one. Let the dreams take over. As you sleep, Let your dreams take you to magical lands and faraway places. Remember, there's no room for worries in your dreams, just magic. It's a magic place where anything can happen, anything you want. It's a place of positivity and light. Let positivity soak into you and fill you up. Imagine it as a golden light traveling from the tips of your toes to the top of your head. Imagine that wherever the light touches you fills with happiness. Imagine that the light makes you feel calm. You're wrapped in a warm, cozy glow within your soft, toasty blanket. Isn't that nice? You are safe, tucked up tight. So sleep soundly all through the night. Sweet dreams, little one. I'll see you soon.